Smart Silver Stacker here. Hope you're doing well. So, there's been some developments over the past couple of hours which really just confirmed to me that we are skating on thin ice here and that the potential for black swan events, for major disruptive events, is at an incredibly escalated level. I think that's putting it lightly. So, just to recap, I mean, we're in the midst of a huge stock market bubble, but the air is starting to come out of that. We had a big sell off in the NASDAQ across the stock markets, over $1 trillion wiped out in a fairly short period of time just recently. If you're paying attention to what's going on in Paris, they just had attacks on the railway system regarding the Olympics. The Olympics are kicking off there. The railway system coming under attack, being firebombed. If you watched the display there, and I can't really talk too much about it, I don't want to get hit with a copyright strike. I mean, if you're following the news, you know what I'm talking about. But the opening ceremony of the Olympics. Now, listen, there's a place for inclusion and all that stuff, but sometimes it's a little over the top. And I mean, it just looks like, if you were reading the Hunger Games right now, we are the capital. That's what it looks like when you watch the opening ceremonies of the Olympics. It's just, decadence. It's a decadent society that has borrowed way beyond its means. We've been on top of the pile for a long time, but that's looking like that's less certain than ever before. The future of the dollar, less certain than ever before. And we're going to get to the news from the Middle East here shortly, because it's looking like this could be the black swan to really kick things off. And of course, it's kind of a misnomer to call anything in the news a potential black swan, because by their very nature, black swan events are unpredictable, right? That's part of the definition. It's something that you can't see coming, that comes out of left field. But one thing that you can say when you examine everything that's going on in the world right now: wars, decadence, massive expansion of fiat currency supplies, inflation that has eviscerated a quarter of the dollar's purchasing power over just the past 5 years, it becomes clear that even if you can't call the next black swan, you can tell that we are not prepared to deal with whatever does happen. I mean, we are fragile, right? We are the opposite of robust given the current situation. And it all really comes down to why we stack silver, right? Why do we stack hard assets? I mean, we're not stacking silver to get rich. I think that all of us have been kind of disabused of that notion over the past decade or so. But you stack silver and you stack gold, you stack physical bullion to have it outside of the system, right? Because there's no telling what could come next. And it is reassuring, at least, to have some financial certainty with hard assets. I want to talk about the news. So let's get into the news here. We got an attack today allegedly from Hezbollah targeting a football or soccer field in the Golan Heights in Israel, resulting in about 30 casualties. Thus far, 11 have died. Some were children, sadly. Certainly, civilians being targeted by either side of this conflict is, horrendous and a terrible thing. But from a geopolitical standpoint, it is now being said by the Israeli foreign minister that Israel is approaching a moment of all-out war against Hezbollah. And this attack, it's looking like it may be the catalyst for that, the casus belli, if you will. I mean, certainly we're already at war. I mean, they've been exchanging rocket and artillery fire for months now, since October 7th, but this attack is a little different because it is the highest number of civilian casualties among Israelis since October 7th. Interestingly, certain reports coming out that Hezbollah actually denies launching this strike. So that does seem somewhat uncharacteristic. Perhaps it's because they understand the severity of this, or perhaps it's because they didn't launch it. I mean, I don't know. I'm not there. I don't really have a dog in the fight, but they're claiming that, this wasn't them. So it's interesting that this coincides with Netanyahu's visit to the U.S. What was he preparing U.S. lawmakers for? A lot of them saying they want an end to the war, but of course they signed the billions of dollars of weapons packages, which sort of enables the conflict to continue. Was this a false flag? Was it real? I don't know. It wouldn't be the first time that a major war has been launched over, a false flag attack. I'm not suggesting that that's the case, but you got to consider it, right? Got to consider all angles here and try to, prevent yourself from having your inherent bias kind of guide you. But the important thing here, really, for all of us, whether you have a dog in this fight or not, is that this could lead to a large scale regional war. Iran's not going to sit this one out. If Israel goes to all out war with Hezbollah and, Nasrallah and the Iranian backed militias in the region, Iran is not going to be sitting this out. We've been following this since October 7th. It seems likely that a crisis, a war could break out. But that is, again, repeatedly, we just see escalation after escalation. An interesting report that we got earlier this week. Now, this is related to the Middle East, and this also is, setting us up for a potential black swan type event here. Is, if you recall, there was an airstrike on the one of the main ports in Yemen. The Israelis conducted this airstrike. It was in retaliation to a drone strike which hit Tel Aviv. So they blew up this major oil refinery with a series of airstrikes. The port of Hodeidah got blasted, and there were calls from Saudi Arabia at the time for everybody to kind of calm down. They don't want regional conflict. It's bad for business. They have a long history of fighting with the Houthis. They don't want a return to that conflict. But then there's this report from the Middle East Monitor, which came out a few days ago, indicating that Israel actually used Saudi airspace in launching that strike. So that could also be setting us up for further escalations in the Middle East. I mean, the Houthis in Yemen, they are now attacking as far as Tel Aviv. That could also open up the door for them to retaliate against the Saudis. Now, the Saudis make a big chunk of global oil production. The Middle East, it's all about oil there. And they have major oil refining facilities that the Houthis actually, in the past, have successfully attacked, created huge fires, created disruptions to the oil supply chain in Saudi Arabia. So given these reports that Saudi Arabia allowed Israel to use its airspace, the Houthis may view that as aggression from the Saudis. And so the whole region is being set up as a major powder keg. We've got a few other things to cover here, but I do want to say, we had a big sell-off in the stock market over the past week. We had a big drop in the price of silver. Now, this pullback in the price of silver is coinciding with some of the lowest premiums that we have seen in years on many bullion products. Right now, look at junk silver. Junk silver is, or 90% silver, constitutional silver, and some people get offended by the term junk silver. I mean, that's what the coin shops call it, so I've been calling it that for over a decade. I don't think I'm going to break that habit, but this stuff is going for a $10 face roll, contains about 7.15 troy ounces of silver, going for about $206.58 right now. If you do the math, current spot price $28.10, that represents just under 3% markup over the spot value of that silver. Now, one thing about junk silver, and I don't have any of it actually out today to show you for demonstration purposes, but junk silver is an asset that tends to appreciate significantly during times of crisis. Now, it actually moves faster than the price of silver, the spot price. You saw this back in March of 2023 when the bank started failing, when Silicon Valley filed for bankruptcy or closed on March 10th. It took about 2 months of steadily increasing premiums until junk silver in May of 2023, just last year, at a time when the spot price of silver was lower than it is today. It was about 23 to 24 bucks throughout the month of May. Junk silver, you can do some research. Some sites do actually have the tracking of premiums on junk silver, but that same $10 roll of junk silver back at that time would have been selling for about $230. It was going for about $32 an ounce if you do the math. And that was at a time when the spot price was lower than it is today. So I think that there are some really big opportunities for stackers right now to do some of that, getting into hard assets. I think this stuff is on sale now. Could the spot price of silver fall further? Sure. But the premiums on certain bullion products, such as junk silver, have gotten so low that, if we do get a black swan, if we do get a major sell off, if we do get a crisis, a financial crisis, I think that regardless of what the spot price of silver does, certain bullion products like 90% silver coins are going to really take off. This is just based on the experience that we had last year when the banks started to fail. So, there are still some really good deals right now. Other things like pre 1933 gold is incredibly cheap right now. In fact, that's not a market that I followed much because I always assumed they had a high collectible premium. They're kind of numismatic coins, but now you can get these slabbed pre 1933 gold coins for like 5-6% over spot. If anybody knows, about that market, I'm sure that some of the people who watch this channel know a lot about numismatic coins and the history of pre 1933 gold and the premiums on that, why they've come down so much. I mean, the reason is because everybody is selling their physical bullion right now, which I think is the wrong move considering how crazy things are getting in the world. But it's also because people are being squeezed by inflation, so they're having to divest themselves of these physical assets. And for those who are getting prepared, that can mean having physical silver. I've always said you also want to have a decent cash position. Like, don't go stack if it's your last dollar, because you need to have cash reserves in the event of unexpected, unforeseen expenses. You want to keep some powder dry. Well, also, if we get a financial crisis, if we get a crash, those of you who are well positioned, who have not gotten into massive consumer debt, who have some physical metal set aside, some safe haven assets, who have some cash, there's going to be deals out there. And we're kind of seeing that right now in the bullion space. You can get, collectible old coins, not the junk silver. They haven't made this stuff since 1964. The supply is very limited. That's why the price spikes up whenever there's a crisis, because there just isn't enough to go around. But right now, people are very complacent. You can see that in a less than 3% premium on junk silver coins. When I started stacking, you could get junk right around spot. After last year, I didn't think that was ever going to be the case, but here we are. You can load up on the stuff very inexpensively right now, despite the fact that silver is up, 15% year to date. Still some amazing deals. Now, this is why we really need to pay attention to the crisis in the Middle East, because right now, tech stocks, paper assets in the U.S. have gotten certainly into bubble territory. And it looks like they're looking for a pin to prick the bubble. Now, I think that barring a black swan or barring a major financial crisis, we're probably actually just going to see a correction in the stock market, and then it's going to start going back up. I think the same thing's going to happen with gold and silver, because the Fed is going to start printing money soon. They're going to either cut maybe next week. I mean, that's a possibility. I think the CME FedWatch tool says there's like a 7% chance of that. But markets are pricing in more than a 100% chance of rate cuts in September. Now, that's kind of a double-edged sword, right? The easy money is going to start flowing. It's going to prop these assets up. But also, if something happens that stops the Fed from cutting, well, the expectation is already being priced in, so you could see a worse sell-off. But one of the things that this whole Middle East situation could, make a lot of that seemingly irrelevant and really shock these markets to their core is because there are critical choke points in the Middle East, such as the Strait of Hormuz, where a huge portion of global energy production transits every day. Now, these are some older numbers on the Wikipedia page, but this is a strait that's between Iran and the UAE. It is within range, by the way, of Houthi attacks. If Houthis can attack Tel Aviv with drones and missiles, they can also target the Strait of Hormuz. And if Iran gets drawn into a conflict with Israel and Hezbollah, one of the weapons that they have used historically is to shut off the transit of oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, you can see that this data, I think, is from about 2018, so it's a little bit dated, but this is still a good representation of just how much oil flows through this area. 20 million barrels per day almost. That is a huge amount of oil. Global production, I think, is somewhere around 100 million barrels. I don't have the exact numbers, but it's a huge chunk. And they go on to say here, based on a 2007 report, that 17 million barrels pass through the Persian Gulf daily, but flows through the strait. It accounts for roughly 40% of all world traded oil. So if this conflict creates an interruption to the flow of crude oil through the Strait of Hormuz, one way or the other, whether it's the Houthis, whether it's the Iranians, whether it's some unforeseen factor, the Middle East being thrown into conflict is a huge problem. And if that happens, the price of crude oil, first of all, is going to spike up, right? That would be one of the initial possible outcomes of that, almost inevitable, I think. And, do me a favor here. We're about 200 people on the live stream. 59 thumbs up. Do me a favor, just smash that like button. If you find this information at all helpful, interesting, or entertaining, it's one of the things you can really do to help support the channel. So I really appreciate that. But that could throw a damper on the Fed printing, of course, because massively higher energy prices will be reflected in the price of almost anything. It means inflation is going to soar. That might put a damper on the Fed returning to easy monetary policy. It's also going to increase all the input costs for all these businesses, right? All these stocks. A lot of these tech stocks, they are somewhat energy intensive these days. The AI revolution relies on data centers. The cost of electricity, cost of power is really a meaningful factor. The cost of fabricating semiconductors is very energy intensive, very resource intensive. And all of this stuff could get massively disrupted by soaring energy prices. And if the Middle East descends into chaos, which, I mean, based on this attack and the way the Israelis are talking about this, remember, the Israeli foreign minister just said that they are approaching a moment of all-out war against Hezbollah. And again, I mean, that is not going to just be Hezbollah. That means war with Iran. That could be incredibly disruptive to the global economy. So that could send everything into a tailspin. Forget $1 trillion in paper wealth wiped out. I mean, you're talking about sovereign debt crisis, end of the petrodollar, right? I mean, that agreement, which was supposed to expire recently, but I mean, that could really be jeopardized. The flow of oil, everything could be reshaped following a conflict like that. I mean, I don't even pretend to, be able to forecast beyond that point. Who knows how that might wind up, but certainly it's going to be incredibly disruptive to the status quo. So look, I mean, the bottom line here is we need to be very vigilant between now and November and moving beyond that, because there's just so much stuff going on. I mean, we had an assassination attempt. We've got arson and sabotage on critical infrastructure in France. I mean, it's hard to even keep this stuff straight. All these stories that are occurring at the moment, but things are getting very serious around the world. You've got multiple conflicts in other theaters. Eastern Europe continues to be a huge problem. North Korea, now Russia's military ally. So the Korean Peninsula, Taiwan. You've got the Philippines and China contesting territory in the South China Sea, or I think the West Philippine Sea is what they call that, if I'm getting my geography correct. But this is a time of major escalation around the world, and the possibility of black swan events seems to be increasing tremendously. If you have some thoughts on, what could be the event to disrupt everything, put it in the comments down below. Let me know what you think we need to be looking out for here, because there are just so many potential hotspots. It seems like every week we get some new kind of crazy news. It would be nice if we could just get a little break for a minute. But despite that, people are being complacent. Silver's on sale. Silver's super cheap. I think people are just struggling to get by at this point. I mean, that is my feeling. That is how it appears to be on the ground here. I mean, if you go shopping, you know that if you've got kids or family and you're feeding even just yourself, it's getting incredibly difficult to just meet the basic living expenses. And yet there are signs that the war is going to escalate around the world. That is going to lead to higher inflation, to be more disruptive of global supply chains. Hopefully that's not the case, but I think it's best in this case to perhaps hope for the best and prepare for the worst. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments down below, everybody. Things are getting dicey, and I think it's just getting started. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, and stay safe and happy stacking, everybody. I'll catch you next time. Smart Silver Stacker out.